Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing. As you can see, I'm here on my own this morning, and that's because the inquiry learned quite late last night that Miss Istefan has been taken ill and would be unable to attend today's hearing. Some of her symptoms seem to be similar to those that we've been led to expect of COVID-19, but it's too early to know whether she's contracted the virus, and we shan't know that for a little while. She is, however, able to follow the proceedings remotely, and she's able to communicate with the inquiry by email. In those circumstances, any vulnerable individuals or those who may be concerned about COVID-19 should obviously feel free not to attend any hearings in person, and I see that there are very few members of the public here today, and should instead follow the proceedings remotely on the live stream. But I would like to reassure you that stringent cleaning measures have been put in place at the premises, including over the weekend, and will continue for as long as is necessary. In addition to the installation of hand sanitizer throughout the venue, we've increased daily cleaning activity to ensure that all surfaces in the public areas are wiped regularly with an appropriate form of disinfectant. And I'll talk to you a little later about our thoughts about how we continue from here. But before I do that, I understand that Mr. Williamson wants to address me. Yes, Mr. Williamson.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. As you'll recall, I'm here on behalf of the Team 2 bereaved survivors and residents. Self-evidently, the coronavirus 19 position has changed considerably since we last met on Thursday. Yeah. Since then, numerous responsible organisations have taken steps additional to those which the government has prescribed. For example, universities are stopping face-to-face teaching. Many businesses have told their staff to work from home. Many businesses and other organisations are screening visitors. Football matches have been postponed and so on. And I should say that with regard to this inquiry, as I think is evident in the room, some of the law firms involved and many of the core participants involved have now taken the view that they cannot responsibly require their staff to attend. Clearly, the inquiry cannot simply carry on as if nothing is happening, nor can it, with respect, shelter behind the assertion that it will follow government advice. The inquiry needs itself to consider and to announce publicly the results of such consideration as to what it considers should be done to protect the health of those involved. It seems to us that there are three issues now. The first is the news which we received very late last night as to the unfortunate illness of Ms. Istefan. Clearly the news that she may have the virus is very concerning for her and others until her position is clarified, and I should say that may not be easy due to the lack of testing facilities. We do not see how the hearing can proceed in any event with a panel of 2 members, one of whom is unfit to attend. There is also obviously the question of those with whom she has been in contact. Secondly, the inquiry needs to consider, as are all other responsible organisations, whether there are additional steps that can be taken at the premises to make them safe. For example, the screening of attendees, additional cleaning that's been referred to, staff rotation and so on. It seems to us that the inquiry needs to consider those matters, tell the core participants what is proposed, and to listen carefully to any comments. Thirdly, and more generally, it seems highly unlikely, for numerous reasons, that the hearing is going to be able to proceed for very long, if at all, at this venue, and so we need to consider what can be proposed by way of virtual or remote hearings, so that we can take instructions from our clients on any such proposals. It does seem to us that the inquiry needs to consult with the core participants on this issue and to take careful account of their comments. clearly, in all of this, the bereaved survivors and residents need to be consulted and they need to be at the centre of the process. This inquiry was set up to review an avoidable tragedy. It should not itself be the source of further avoidable tragedy. So I would finally urge you, sir, to listen carefully to what I've said and to take some time to respond. Simply to carry on with the next witness as if nothing is happening is not an option in our respectful submission. Thank you.
Well, now, before you go, Mr. Williams, then you won't be surprised to hear that we've been having these things very much in mind. And, of course, we didn't know until quite late yesterday evening that Ms. Istefan was unwell, and we still don't know, as I said, what the problem is. But we have been giving consideration to means by which the hearings can continue, at least for the time being, one of which we might talk about in a moment, which is limited attendance hearings. Could you help me, first of all, on your first point, which is you adumbrated, but you passed over quite quickly, that we couldn't continue without Ms. Istefan?
Well, it's a panel of two, which is now reduced to one. Now,
yes and no. Ms. Istefan is apparently, we've been in contact with her this morning. She's able to follow the proceedings on the live link. She's able to communicate with us by email, and I imagine telephone if that were necessary. Are you suggesting there's what I might call a constitutional problem here, or is it just a matter of finding a sensible procedure which will enable her to participate to the appropriate extent?
Well, we obviously don't know, nor indeed probably exactly what's wrong with Miss Istefan, but clearly that she must be able to participate fully in the hearing, and if that is possible, then that may be a resolvable problem. But
well, we have the live stream.
Yes.
And I think I had a message from her this morning saying that she was intending to follow proceedings on the live stream. The live stream, well, the recording can be viewed at any time from any location. So the evidence can be reviewed.
Except that while relativity is down, I don't think it's possible elsewhere, is it, to review the documents?
I think the live stream is available on YouTube. That's my understanding. I'm looking at Mr. Millett for some help.
Yeah, I've been here.
I don't think it's dependent on relativity. Do we know the answer to that?
Has access to the live stream,
yeah,
even though relativity is down.
Thank you. So she can follow the proceedings, and yes. I mean, I have myself been thinking about whether her presence at the hearing is essential to the continuation of the inquiry, and I'm provisionally coming to the view that providing we can be satisfied that she can view all the evidence and communicate with us if necessary, that would be adequate. But if you want to say otherwise, I'd welcome your views.
Well, the message that we got last night was simply, and it was very late last night, was simply that Miss Istefan was ill.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
And clearly illness can take many forms.
Yeah.
It may be that she's being precautionary, or it may be she's actually under the weather. One doesn't know.
So can I take it then that you would be minded to accept that if she, provided she can, and of course does, view the evidence in its entirety, that would be adequate?
Well, I don't, I'm receiving information. This is not a criticism, because obviously events are unfolding almost faster than the human mind can catch up with. But I'm receiving information on the hoof, and I don't want to make policy on the hoof, so I would want to take instructions on that point.
But this is really a point of principle, isn't it? I mean, in another context, you might say that, take an arbitration panel as an example, can't sit without a full complement of arbitrators. Well, we're not in quite that situation. I sense from what you were saying that you would probably not argue that the same principle applied here.
Well, I don't think there's necessarily a technical point.
That's really what I wanted to flush out.
I think the test is whether Mrs. Stefan is both fit to proceed and is able technologically to take as much part from wherever she is as she presumably at home as she would.
Right,
if she
and
were
if she were not well enough today but could view evidence, if any were given today, tomorrow on the live stream, would that not do?
Well,
It wouldn't be live stream, of course, it would be recording, but...
But so, with respect, I think that does slightly shade into the other points which I was making, is that if the assumption is that we are going to carry on in the current setup indefinitely, that is one situation, but that with respect, seems highly unlikely.
Yeah.
And so I think our overall position is that there needs to be a pause for reflection. That may cause inconvenience to the next proposed witness, reflection and consultation, and to decide on what might describe as a medium-term strategy.
Do you want to make any suggestions at this stage about medium-term strategy or short-term strategy?
Well, I think we need to know from you what is technologically possible, not from you personally, but from your team, and then we need to take instructions on that, because there's obviously going to be a tension between health on the one hand and participation.
I think
on the
one
other
thing that certainly has been passing through my mind and is technologically feasible, subject to people's agreement, is that we hold limited attendance hearings in this room, but with attendance limited to those whose presence is essential, which would, apart from the panel and counsel, would be obviously be the witness, but also all those who support our functions, the shorthand writer, the ushers, the technicians, and so on. Now that might involve actively excluding most, if not all, of the lawyers and all the public. Is that something you've given any thought to?
We haven't thought about the exclusion issue. We have obviously thought about the remote working issue.
Well, yeah, but it depends what you mean by remote working.
Well, I haven't personally considered the option you've just put, which is sort of a hybrid between carrying on and a fully remote hearing. But I think there is a potential route which involves taking as many people out of this building as possible, provided that those who are in dialogue with counsel to the inquiry can continue that dialogue, and that is going to need some adjustment to our methods of working.
Right.
I mean, for example, we have been considering document access and also, as it were, virtual access to Mr. Millis and his team. For example, one might say when a witness, and I'm just thinking out loud here, when a witness finishes the evidence that counsel to the inquiry wish to extract, one might then have a slightly longer pause than we've had heretofore. There could then be a telephone conference between, for example, Mr. Millis and those interested, in which there could be discussion of any additional points that need to be put. And in addition, obviously, to the use of email and so on for more formal communications.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No. But I should say my instructions as such are limited to the suggestion that we should all pause to reflect how we move forward. So I'm not in a position to commit my clients to any particular way of moving forward. And it does seem to us to involve a dialogue.
Yes. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, is there anyone else who'd like to make any observations about this? Ms. Barwise, do you want to come and say something?
Sir, if you wouldn't mind.
Of course, come on.
Obviously, just heard what my learned friend said, sir, but for our part, we should very much prefer your hybrid option of continued participation by those who are able and willing to do so, which hopefully includes yourself and the counsel of the inquiry team and those staff that you might need to help you. We appreciate, obviously, that you are and will be addressing how you continue For our part, we feel it's terribly important the inquiry does continue as best it is able, but obviously bearing in mind the needs of health and safety, your own included, sir. So we leave it in your hands, but we should most welcome continued carrying on today as we are, given we're all here, the witnesses here.
Yeah.
We wish to carry on. We would suggest that if it becomes necessary in due course, even to cross-examine by video link, that might be possible. And I'm sure that your minds will all be turning to those questions over the coming days. But again, we default to the position that we don't want to pause now unless it becomes absolutely inevitable.
So do I understand this correctly? You don't wish to argue that the absence of Miss Estefan's personal presence in the room is a fatal bar to continuing?
Absolutely not, sir. I think her physical presence is, with the greatest respect to her, completely irrelevant, because if she's able to participate with you...
it's a second best not to have to view it on the live link or
yes.
recording, but it's reasonable, right?
But it's reasonable, and she can see the documents that the operator puts up. She can see.
Yeah.
Therefore, there is no disadvantage,
Right.
save that you can't immediately communicate with her.
And you wouldn't have any objection to what I've called limited attendance hearings?
No, sir. No.
We might need to have a discussion if we were to take that course as to how limited the attendance should be.
Indeed.
Because it might be necessary to exclude actively some people who might be willing to be here but whose presence isn't really essential.
Yes, and I understand that, sir, and it may be, probably would be, that is in fact a responsible course, given we can all participate. And perhaps the only thing I would say is that if you were to adopt that course, it might be wise to allow slightly longer breaks when you break with the witness to facilitate email communication with counsel to the inquiry, because obviously I'm conscious that's a difficult process.
Well, I gather it's been going on already, so maybe it just needs to be a bit more refined.
It has indeed. We have been bending ears, but we'd like the option to do that by email too.
All right. Yes.
Very grateful.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to say anything about this? No? All right. Well, now you all know, I think, that we have witnesses waiting to come on who've travelled from the north of England. And that's something we need to take into consideration. I'm going to rise for a moment to just to consider what's the best way forward for today. And once we've decided that, we can then consider how we should take things forward thereafter. It won't come as a surprise to any of you to know that at least two people in this room might not be able to be here if the government decides that over 70s should be banned from going out. Mr. Mansfield and I certainly fall into that category. I don't think anyone else does, but if you do, well, same problem. All right, I'm going to rise for a few minutes now. Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to Council for their submissions. It seems to me that in principle, there are three options. One is to carry on regardless until people become ill, in which case we'd have to suspend the hearings anyway. The second is to continue hearings as far as we can on a limited basis, ensuring that the minimum number of people whose presence is necessary are here. And the third would be to suspend hearings altogether for an indefinite period. The first is obviously, I think, not a responsible course. We have to have regard to the health of all those who take part in the hearings and support them. We are, however, keen to continue making progress because we think it's important and in the public interest for us to do so and to lose as little time as we reasonably can. So suspending the hearings at this stage does not seem to be sensible if there's a reasonably satisfactory alternative. We have already consulted core participants. Yesterday evening, the solicitor to the inquiry wrote to the legal representatives of core participants, setting out the different possibilities and inviting their views on the best way forward. I think we asked to receive responses by the end of today, and in the light of those responses, when we've received them, we shall take a decision about what to do over the immediately coming days. But it's right to say that we are giving serious consideration to what I identified as the second course, which is limited attendance hearings, which, subject to the agreement of all those who support the inquiry, that we should continue to take evidence from witnesses, provided, of course, it's reasonable to ask the witnesses to come here, whilst excluding from the room all those whose presence is not strictly necessary. As I say, we shall not take a decision on that until we've received responses from core participants, but that is the way that our minds are currently working at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, we have witnesses from the north of England who've come down to give evidence today, and it would seem sensible to take their evidence today on the basis that although this will not be formally a limited attendance hearing in the sense that we shall exclude actively those whose presence is not essential, I would encourage anyone who is reluctant to be here to go home or to go back to your office or wherever and watch the proceedings on the live link. Certainly you'll cause no offence by doing that, and if the room empties when I finish speaking, I shall understand why. On that basis, I've reached the conclusion that the best thing is to carry on the basis that I've indicated today. At the end of the day, we shall review the position and decide whether to institute limited attendance hearings tomorrow on the basis that we shall not allow in those who do not have, or those whose attendance is not necessary for the purpose. So, Mr. Millett, do we have a witness who's ready to come and give evidence?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do. We have Cate Cooney from Exova, who is ready to give evidence.
Right. Thank you. And if anyone wants to go, please feel free to do that.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly,
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Take a seat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cooney. Sit down, make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Millett.
Ms. Cooney, good morning. And thank you very much for attending today to give evidence. Could we start, please, by your telling the Chairman your full name?
It's Catherine Cooney.
Catherine Cooney. If you have any difficulty understanding the questions that I'm going to ask you, then please say. I can either repeat the question or I can put the question in a different way. And if you feel you need a break at any point, please let me know. One other thing, please, if you wouldn't mind, please, keeping your voice up so that the transcribers who sit there to your right can get down what you're saying. That would be very helpful. Now, you've made one statement for the inquiry. If I could please take you to that. It's in the folder in front of you on the desk, but it will appear also on the screen because we're going to be going to it, and it's probably better to follow it on the screen. But if you would prefer, then please do follow it in the paper form in front of you. It's dated the 28th of September 2018. If we could just have that up, please, on the system. And could you please identify that formally as your witness statement?
It is.
And could you please go to page 8? And you'll see there at the bottom of page 8 a signature over the date, 28th September 2018. Is that your signature?
It is.
And just for the record, that is relativity reference EXO 00001590. Ms. Cooney, have you read this statement recently?
I have, yes.
Thank you. Can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes.
Have you discussed your evidence that you're going to give today with anybody before coming here this morning?
Yes, with my solicitors.
Right. Now, there are a number of exhibits to the statement, which is shown on the schedule, which we'll just have up as well, please. That's IDX 0056. Could you just confirm, please, for us that that is a list of the exhibits attached to your statement?
It is.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Cooney, I'm going to start, if I may, by asking you some questions about your background and your experience, all right? And I'm just going to take you, will summarise for you what you say in your statement. You began, I think, working in the construction industry in the early 2000s, yes?
Yes.
And you completed an undergraduate degree in French.
Yes.
Yes. What was your first involvement in the construction industry?
I worked for some as an assistant surveyor for building surveying practices to start off with. Then I moved into building control within a couple of years of that.
Right. And roughly what year did you move into building control?
It was December 2003.
Right. Now, you studied for a degree in building surveying, which I think you completed in 2005. Is that right?
Yes.
Where did you undertake that study?
That was at the University of Salford.
Salford. And then I think you say that you had experience working in the building control departments at Lancaster Council
Yes.
for 18 months, and then at Manchester City Council.
That's correct.
And I think you stayed at Manchester City Council for some 6.5 years.
Yes.
And then I think you moved to Exova in 2011.
That's correct.
Right. Can I ask you, what post did you hold within the building control department of Manchester City Council?
At Manchester, I started as an assistant surveyor and then moved on to a full area surveyor.
Right. And how long were you in post as a full area surveyor?
I think I moved into that post approximately 2007,
Right.
2008 maybe.
Okay, so you had that role there for some 3.5 to 4 years before moving
I'd
to
have to
Exeter.
check the date, but it was quite soon after I
Yes.
started at Manchester.
But when you worked there, were you a member of any professional bodies?
Not until 2008 when I joined the RICS.
You joined the RICS in
As a member.
2008.
Yes,
Are you still a member of the RICS?
I am, yes.
Right. Now, at paragraph 2 of your statement, if we could just have that up, please. It's EXO 00001590, page 2. But paragraph 2, you say that your work in the Manchester building control department, including reviewing building control approvals applications for a variety of building regulations processes. That's correct, is it?
It is.
So can we take it that you became very familiar with building control approvals processes, at least prior to the time you left in 2011 and went to Exova?
Yes.
Can we also take it that you became very familiar with the building regulations and the related approved documents?
Yes.
And did you specialise in fire safety as a building control officer?
No, I didn't specialise until I moved to Exova.
I see. Did you have some experience or exposure to fire safety when you were working as building
Yes.
control?
Yes.
Right. can I take it that you are or became familiar with approved document B?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, if you look at paragraph 2.3 of your statement, towards the top of page 2, you say that in the second sentence, while employed by Exova, I obtained a Master of Science degree in Fire and Explosion Engineering from the University of Leeds. When did you complete that degree?
2015.
2015. So while you were working at Exova?
Yes.
I see. And was that a part-time course or a full-time course?
It was part-time over 3 years.
Part-time over 3 years. Now, at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project, which was the summer of 2012, were you based in Exova's offices in Warrington?
I was.
You were. Was that your permanent place of work?
Yes.
Right. And at the time of your work on the Grenfell project in that year, I think you were a senior consultant at Exova. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And you're now, I think, a principal consultant at Exova, yes?
I left the company last April, but I was a principal before leaving.
I see. And when were you appointed a principal within Exova?
I would have to check the dates, but I think it was 2015, maybe early 2016. It's in that 6-month period after graduating, I was made principal.
Yes, I see. Okay. And can you tell us where you work now, please?
I work in Lancaster for an approved inspector company.
Right. So essentially in building control.
In building control, yes.
Can you just help us understand the hierarchy of positions within Exova? So, for example, when you were a senior consultant, would you be directly, well, who would you be directly answerable to?
So the structure was essentially, there was a senior consultant, above that there was a principal consultant, and then associate, and then director. So I was answerable to anybody who was above me, really, in the...
I see. Okay. And who would be junior to you?
Consultant, engineers and graduates.
I see. Okay. Can you explain what your role as senior consultant at Exova typically involved?
Typically, it was looking at designs for fire safety, where there may be slight variations or variations from approved document B or other guidance, where an alternative approach might be desired.
And I think you were certified under Warrington Fire's or Exova Warrington Fire's Fire Risk Assessor Certification Scheme, or
Yes.
FRAX, weren't you?
Yes,
And you, I think, had certificate number FRA24,
I think so.
first issued on the 7th of August 2012.
Okay.
Is that?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Well, we have a document to that effect, but
Okay.
Perhaps I'll show it to you just so you can confirm it. It's INQ 000-11331, please. Can you identify that as your FRAX certificate, issued on the 7th of August 2012?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. In order to obtain that certification, did you have to be assessed?
Yes, I did.
Who by?
The assessors were external to Warrington Fire, so they brought in people who dedicated. It was an independent assessment, if you will, from Exova. I can't remember the names of the guys that were there. I think it was, one of the assessors was an ex-fire and rescue chief from kind of high-level fire service at Manchester.
Right.
A guy called Andy Howard.
Right.
Who was, I
And
think.
who chose the assessors to conduct that assessment?
I don't know.
I mean, was it an Exova choice as to who to go to conduct it, or was there a system?
I don't know.
You don't know. What did they assess you on? Do you remember?
They assessed me on general fire safety design, the regulatory reform order, and various risk assessment approaches.
Did they assess you on ADB or the building regulations more generally?
Not specifically to the building regulations. That's part of a larger package of fire safety knowledge you will be expected to have to be FRAX registered.
Yes, I see. And did you actually look at ADB and building regulations more generally as part of your masters?
ADB and the building regulations are kind of the baseline, if you will. They are deemed to satisfy, the approved document is deemed to satisfy the regulations. We looked at it, but the degree was more technical in terms of the engineering side of things.
I follow. And just one more question on this document. You can see that the certificate was issued on the 7th of August 2012. How long before that date do you remember you undertook the assessment?
I don't know. I can't recall.
Okay. I'm now going to turn to your role at Grenfell in the project. If you look, please, at paragraph 3.3 of your statement on page 2, you say that Claire Barker, a principal consultant at Exova, tasked you with producing the existing fire safety strategy, or the existing FSR, which we can call it, for the Grenfell Tower building.
Yes.
Now, can you remember when you received that instruction?
It will have been in the early August, I think, or late July of 2012.
Right.
I can't remember a specific date.
Now, your draft existing fire safety strategy, which we'll look at in some detail shortly, was dated the 16th of August 2012. Mm-hmm. Do you remember even roughly how long before that you remember being instructed by Miss Barker to produce it?
It was a small amount of time. I remember it was quite. We were asked to produce a document under fairly short order. I think it was a matter of 3, maybe 4 weeks. So that's as accurate as I can be, I'm afraid.
All right. Well, let's look at some documents. First, please, can you be shown EXO 00001613? And if we look at the top email, and then the second one down on page 1, the top email is an email to you from Dr. Barker, Claire Barker, on the 7th of August 2012. You see that?
Yes.
And she sent you, it seems, some documents. You see the attachments. And underneath that, she said, see below. And underneath that, the below email is from Bruce Soanes at Studio E on the 30th of July 2012 to Claire Barker. And he says, Dear Claire, I wanted to thank you for coming to the project meeting last Thursday. I appreciate that it can seem like you occupy a very small part of the agenda and therefore an expensive use of your time, but Thursday was the first time since May that we've managed to assemble the whole team, including the client and the contractor, and it was an invaluable briefing for everyone. I would not expect to need another meeting with Exova before we submit for planning, and possibly not again until we're in negotiation with building control. And he says, please see attached the specification for the smoke exhaust stroke ventilation to the residential lobbies. We're more than happy to continue working with you in Warrington, but if someone else in London is going to pick it up, we would like to know as soon as possible. Please, could you get back to me? Now, I've read you the full email just to try and prompt your recollection. It looks from this that your first involvement is this email from Claire Barker to you on the 7th of August, attaching the documents and forwarding Mr. Soanes's email of the 30th of July. Is that right, do you think?
It seems to be right, yes.
Right. Yeah. So can we proceed on the basis that this date, 7th of August, was the first time you became involved?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what was the context in which Dr. Barker sent you this email?
Dr. Barker asked me to prepare a draft report for the existing building and essentially to start the process of the existing fire safety strategy. And at the time, Claire actually sat adjacent to me, so we will have discussed the parameters for that and the information that we might have had. That's essentially how it started.
Yes, I see. So, I mean, she sent you this email on the 7th with virtually no information in it other than what's attached. So was there a conversation between you and Dr. Barker on or prior to the 7th of August before this email was sent to you?
I would imagine so, though I can't recall any specific conversations at that time.
I see. Did she give you a document when she first asked you to prepare the existing fire safety strategy, which set out what she wanted you to do?
I don't recall specific documents from that time. I know that the information that I had was very limited, so I contacted the architects myself.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. Can we just proceed through the documents and see how we go? Could you please be shown EXO 00001618? Now, this is an email from Bruce Soanes to Claire Barker on the 30th of July. The second one down is the email I've just shown you, which relates to the specification to the smoke, exhaust and ventilation to the residential lobbies. We've just looked at that. Okay. Now, let's look at her response to Bruce Soanes the same day, at the top, 30th of July 2012. Do you see that?
I did.
Good afternoon, Bruce. And then, just looking at the third paragraph, if we can, we may come back to the second one, but look at the third one. She says, in terms of allocating resources to this project, I am happy to work on the fire strategy for the existing Grenfell Tower from the Warrington office and will aim to get the report to you before the deadline of the 16th of August. You see that?
Yes.
I'll come back to the deadline in a moment, just because I want to ask you a question about that. But before I do, I just want to show you another document a little bit later. Can you please go back to the document we were looking at before, EXO 00001613. This is the email where she sent you the first of the emails of the 30th of July, namely Bruce Soanes' email to Dr. Barker, but not her response back to him. We looked at that a minute ago. So you've got, I think, all the documents I need you to see. My question is, what information or briefing did Dr. Barker give you other than what is set out in the email from Mr. Soanes to Dr. Barker and the attachments to the email to you from Dr. Barker?
Other than the information that's already attached to the email, I don't recall. I do recall reading a document in relation to the ventilation, which was a proposed document. But other than that, I don't recall reading anything more specific. So I would say that I don't recall particular documents from that time.
Do you remember whether Dr. Barker sent you her response to Bruce Soanes of the 30th of July, which we've just looked at, which said that she would provide the report by the deadline of the 16th of August?
I don't recall whether she sent me the email. I do recall that there was a deadline.
You do. When did she tell you that, do you think?
I would be guessing, but I would assume that it was at that time, around that time, that she passed over the work.
Passed over the work.
So,
right,
deadline.
I see.
Yes.
And did she tell you why there was a deadline of the 16th of August?
Not that I can recall, no.
Right. Did you feel that you were under some kind of pressure of time to produce the fire strategy that Dr. Barker had asked you to do?
I suppose it became the priority at that time. In terms of pressure, not particularly, no more than I would normally feel.
Okay. Now, can I ask you then to go back to the email we looked at a minute ago, EXO 00001618. We can see from Dr. Barker's email to Bruce Soanes dated 30th of July at 3:28, namely the top one on that page. I showed you the third paragraph, but if we look at the second paragraph, she says, with regard to the 2 fee proposals that were issued by Exova, we have received an email today from David Hale at Appleyards accepting the fees for the upgrade of the building, and she gives a reference. I telephoned him to tell him he had accepted the wrong fee, and he's going to email us the right fee acceptance to us tomorrow, so once that arrives, we can get started. You see that?
I do.
You may not have seen this email at the time, Ms. Cooney, but did you know who Appleyards were?
I didn't.
You didn't. Who did you think was the client for the purposes of the report which Dr. Barker had asked you to prepare?
The architectural practice, Studio E.
Studio E.
Yes.
Did you think they might have a client, a lay client?
Yes, I would have. There would have been a longer chain, yes, but the contact that I was given was with Studio E.
Right. Did you take any steps ever to find out who Studio E's client was?
No, not that I recall, no.
Would it not be important to you to know that?
At that particular time, then whether it was one client or another client would not have been material to my at this time. But once we actually got into the into the work itself, then I was aware that Casey TMO were the client.
Do you remember when that was, or how far into the work that was?
It would have been shortly after we started, so that it was gathering information, essentially, so I would have been aware then.
Yes, I see. And when we come to look at the existing fire safety strategy which you drafted, we can see that the client at the bottom of each page is KCTMO, or Kensington and Chelsea TMO, to be accurate. So that was, just to be clear, that was it your understanding throughout the time you were actually preparing the report?
Yes, though I was working with the Studio E, yeah.
Yes, I see. Within Exova, who or whom did you report to during the time you did the work?
Dr. Barker.
Dr. Barker. Anybody else?
At the time, no. Not that I recall.
You say at the time, no. That rather suggests there might have been another
So
time.
it was quite a short period of time. With it being in the middle of the holiday season, there were staff on holiday. So I will have gone back to Claire on various items. I don't recall speaking to anybody else other than members of staff in the London office about it. So James, I don't recall speaking to Mr. Ashton, but I may well have done.
Right. You mentioned James a moment ago. Is that James Lee?
It is, yes.
Okay. We'll come to look at his involvement shortly. Can I take you back, please, to your witness statement and go to page 2, EXO 00001590, page 2. And shall we look together, please, at paragraph 3.3? You say in the second sentence that you were based in the Warrington office, and you say you believe you were chosen to carry out the work in the Warrington office because the London office was not able to resource it at the time because of its workload. You see that?
Yes.
Was it at the time unusual within Exova to have consultants prepare fire safety strategy reports for projects that were not geographically close by?
Yes, there was quite a lot of office interworking, but I think this particular project came to Warrington because of the time of year, with members being on.
So can we take it from that answer that normally the London office would have done this report?
Yes.
Yes. Did Exova have any internal policies or guidelines at this time which guided staff in positions such as yours as to how to carry out a fire strategy report for an existing building?
I don't know of one for that specific type of work. They were more generic than that. So it would have been for fire safety strategy generally.
I see. So there was a policy or guidance within Exova for doing fire strategy reports,
Yes.
just not for existing buildings.
That's right.
Yes, I see. What about guidance or for the obtaining of information from the building owner or responsible person
Not that I am aware of.
Okay. How much experience of preparing fire safety strategy reports for existing buildings did you have prior to doing the one you did for Grenfell Tower in August 2012?
In the format of a fire safety strategy, I wouldn't be able to give you a number, a small number of existing fire strategies within the workload that I'd done since joining Exova.
Right. So you had done some before?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Had you ever done a fire safety strategy report for a high-rise residential block?
I don't know the answer. I would be surprised if I hadn't, but I haven't checked.
Right. At the time you were given the role by Dr. Barker, what CPD or other professional development had you done to guide you on carrying out the Grenfell Tower instruction?
In terms of CPD, it's a process of many years of development with refreshers through the CPD rather than learning just as a module. Obviously, having worked in the industry for a number of years and in quite a densely populated urban environment in Manchester, I was involved with both looking and assessing and inspecting a number of residential buildings, a number of those over 18 metres.
I follow. Would you agree with this proposition that a fire safety engineer sets the agenda regarding the life safety requirements for a project?
I probably wouldn't couch it in that way. I would say that the regulations sets the agenda, and for a building such as this, it's really making sure that the principal elements, the key elements are present and that the design meets with the guidance.
Would you agree with this proposition that standard setting is a key component of the work needed from a practicing fire safety engineer?
Could you?
Yes. Standard setting is a key component of the work needed from a practicing fire safety engineer.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I look briefly with you, please, at precisely what a fire safety strategy is? It may seem a rather simplistic question, but let me try it anyway. Can I ask you, please, to be shown BSI 00001716? Now, this is a British Standard published document, PD 7974, from 2002, entitled Application of Fire Safety Engineering Principles to the Design of Buildings, Part 0, Guide to Design Framework and Fire Safety Engineering Procedures. You see that?
Yes.
Are you familiar with this document?
I am.
Were you familiar with it, do you think, in August 2012?
Yes.
Right. Now, let's look then at paragraph 3.16 on page 7, please. This defines, if you look at the top of the page, a fire safety strategy as a combination of fire safety measures that has been shown by reference to prescriptive codes or a fire engineering study to be capable of satisfying the specified fire safety objectives. You see that?
Yes.
Does that reflect your understanding of what a fire safety strategy was as at August 2012?
Yes.
And it reflects your understanding as at that time, does it?
Yes.
Yes. Now, let's look at page 44, please, which is part 9.7 on page 44 itself. That says, towards the top of page 44, fire safety strategy. The fire safety strategy for the building will be based on the successful trial design and is likely to comprise a range of physical fire safety measures and management procedures. A description of these measures should be provided, together with performance specifications and any recommended deviations from the relevant system codes. Does that reflect your understanding as it was at August 2012?
Yes, it's a very all-encompassing definition, and the range of work that goes into fire safety strategies is bespoke to a particular building. So, if I could give you an example, a building which has no management presence, but may have ad hoc visits, such as a high-rise residential, the management procedures are important, but in terms of the fire safety design of the building, that they are kind of overlapping but separate.
I see. Can I ask you to look at page 10 then, please, which is back in the document earlier on. And let's go to paragraph 4.3.6 at the foot of the page. It says, the accuracy of many FSE calculations is unknown. That's a quotation because it's one of a number of common misconceptions, which you can see the title of at the top of, or a third of the way down that page, 4.3. You see that?
Yes.
And one of the common misconceptions is the accuracy of many FSE calculations is unknown. And then it goes on to say the accuracy of the calculation procedures presented in the PDs supporting BS 7974/2001, etc., will generally be sufficiently accurate for engineering design purposes if they are used within their limits of applicability. Mm-hmm. And then this. However, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out applies, and in most cases, uncertainties in the calculation procedures will be outweighed by any errors in the initial assumptions. For example, the rate of fire growth. Mm-hmm. Were you conscious in August 2012 of that principle in general terms?
In general terms, I was. The PD 7974 series of documents, which this is one of, are more on the, shall we say, the engineering calculation side of fire engineering, whereas the codes are more on the fire safety guidance side, if you will. So there is there's quite a large difference between the two.
Yes, I follow that. But in general terms, can we take it that the general principle, garbage in, garbage out, and what that means was something that you would have had in mind when preparing your existing fire safety strategy report for Grenfell Tower?
It's not something I would have had in mind because we didn't use fire safety engineering principles for the strategy. So fire safety engineering, using these codes, use specific empirical calculations to work things out, like the rate of fire growth or the safe time for evacuation, etc., etc. Whereas a guidance-based approach wouldn't go into the calculation side of things.
Yes,
so there's no, there are no garbage in, garbage out kind of parameters for it, because you're not actually carrying out calculations as such for the vast majority of the work. It's guidance-based. So ADB-based, essentially.
Where the guidance required you to make calculations...
If I would have done, yes, then
yes.
I've been aware of that for a long time, yes.
Can I then take you to the FIA, or Fire Industry Association Guidance Note, which addresses the scope of works for a fire engineer? That's INQ 000112119, please. Are you familiar with this document?
I am, yes.
You are. Now, to be fair to you, this is a document that was produced by the FIA in May 2015,
Right, yes.
which was towards the end of Exova's overall involvement with the Grenfell Tower project, and 3 years or so, perhaps 2.5 years or so, after your involvement in the existing fire strategy for the building. So I put it in time context, but you're familiar with it. And have you read it before?
I have read it. I've not read it cover to cover, but I am aware of the document.
Okay. Would you accept that the FIA guidance note reflects common practice in the construction industry before May 2015?
It's much more structured. No would be the answer.
No.
It's one way of following guidance, I suppose.
I see, okay. Well, let's see how we go with this. Can I just ask you then to turn to page 4 of this FIA guidance? And under general, you can see it says, the fire engineer's overall role will be to provide advice in relation to the fire safety aspects of the design in order to provide reasonable confidence that the design that is developed, as well as the completed building, should achieve an acceptable standard of fire safety, comply with the client's objectives, and meet all relevant legal fire safety requirements. You see that?
Yes.
Would you agree that as at August 2012, this was an accurate summary of the overall role of a fire engineer?
Yes.
You would. Can I invite you just also to consider, would the contents of this document as a whole reflect good practice, or best practice perhaps, of a fire safety engineer as at August 2012?
I would say it was best practice.
Best practice. Can I ask you to look at page 4 at the bottom? That sets out some bullet points, do you see?
Yes.
It says the fire strategy should cover all relevant fire safety design issues, in particular, and then there are 7 of them: design, location and protection of escape routes, identification and specification of all fire safety systems that are required, surface spread of flame requirements for surface materials, structural fire resistance requirements, fire compartmentation requirements including fire stopping and cavity barriers, external fire spread, and access and facilities for fire services. Looking at that list and recognising that you weren't preparing the fire strategy for the refurbishment works, Ms. Cooney, we understand that entirely, would you accept that any fire strategy for a building as existing would need to cover all of those elements?
Yes, they are the standard B1 to B5 requirements of the building regulations. So
Yes.
yes.
Would you agree that a fire strategy for a building, an existing building, is an important source of narrative information about how to keep the people in that building safe in accordance with the RRO, the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order?
I think it's part of the job. It really depends on the focus, I suppose. The existing fire safety strategy focuses on the design of the building and brings in sufficient amount of management so that the building can be appropriately used. So, in general, I would agree, but with some caveats.
Right, I'm just trying to understand the caveats. You say, I think it's part of the job and depends on the focus. Can you just explain to me again what the caveats are?
So, obviously, every building is different, and every strategy that is written has its own bespoke requirements. When you're looking at an existing fire safety strategy for a building that has been up for a time which predates modern day guidance, then there is some assessment that you need to consider to see whether you're meeting those objectives or not, and that kind of would change the emphasis in certain parts more than in another document for an existing fire safety strategy. It depends on the building, essentially.
I see. Does that mean, and correct me if I've misunderstood your evidence, that where the existing building doesn't meet modern day guidance, then that's something that the building owner should understand and know about and take into account when formulating a strategy to comply with the RRO?
I
I
think
don't want
when
to put words in your mouth, but I just want to understand your evidence.
I think when the strategy is retrospective, so we're looking at an existing structure and existing conditions within a building, absolutely they need to understand if those conditions are not safe or don't meet the threshold, if you will, the benchmark of modern guidance. However, it's not just a gap analysis between how it was constructed and what would today be acceptable. Is that condition safe, essentially?
Yes, I see. Would you also agree that the fire strategy is the primary and definitive source for the specification of the relevant performance criteria that would enable a building to be demonstrated as complying with Part B of the building regulations?
Yes, I would agree insofar as those performance requirements are high level.
Right. When you say at a high level, what sort of performance requirements would not be high level, which would mean that you wouldn't have to or wouldn't be able to enable a building to be demonstrated as compliant with Part B?
So taking the existing fire safety strategy where elements aren't known or certain materials or construction methods, etc., aren't evident, then it wouldn't be wise to look at particular elements individually within the building, different materials, but as a specification under British standards, for example, then that's the kind of level I'm talking about when I talk about high level. We wouldn't go into MBS standards and things like that to specify things for a fire safety strategy.
No. But just so I understand, where you thought that an element was unknown, but where complying with that, or where that element needed to comply with the building regulations, would you point that out to the client normally in your report?
Yes.
You would?
Yes.
Would you also agree that a retrospective fire strategy for an existing building provides an opportunity for the client to investigate fully the current condition of the building and the guidance or regulations to which it was originally designed in order to provide a qualitative and also a quantitative risk assessment of the fire risks that might result from any differences between the original design and the current guidance?
I would agree generally. I wouldn't agree that it is a fire risk assessment. That's something quite separate in my understanding.
Right. Would you agree also that a retrospective fire strategy such that I have just asked you about would allow the person who was responsible under the RRO to understand their building thoroughly and thereby know what general fire precautions might be required in order to comply?
When we're looking at a building from a point of view of the design, that's what would be understood by the client. I think if we then go into management and other types of elements within that, it's kind of becoming a hybrid between a fire risk assessment and a fire safety strategy, which isn't a typical fire safety strategy, really. It focuses on the design of the building rather than a risk assessment which would look at the building in use, etc.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
Just on that, can we take it that in order to prepare a full and proper existing fire safety strategy, you would need to understand and have read the fire risk, or the most up-to-date fire risk assessment for the building?
It's one of the documents that you would require, yes.
Yes. Can I then turn to a slightly different topic, which is the fee proposal and the scope of work, which is at TMO 100377721, dated the 11th of June 2012. Now, you can see that this is an Exova document sent to Mr. Soane's Studio E on the 11th of June 2012. Have you seen this document before?
Yes.
If you go to page 3, you'll see that it's signed by James Lee, consultant at Exova, and was reviewed by Terry Ashton, associate. You see that?
Yes.
Can I ask you to go back to page 1 and look at the project brief then, please? It says underneath project brief, the Grenfell Tower is an existing residential building in London. Exova Warrington Fire has been invited to produce a fire safety strategy report for the existing condition of the building. This fee proposal covers the production of a review of the existing fire safety arrangements for the building. You see that? And if you look a little bit further down, you see there's company profile, and then on page 2, you can see there's proposed scope of the work. We'll come back to that in a moment. Before I do, can I take you into your statement and look, please, with me at paragraph 3.4 on page 2. You say there at 3.4, I do not recall whether I saw the fee proposal at the time, although I note that it covers 1, means of escape, 2, fire safety systems, 3, any smoke ventilation provided, and 4, access and facilities for the fire service. You see that? Mm-hmm. Doing the best you can, when do you think that you first saw this document? If you want me to put it back up on the screen,
No,
happy to do that.
I've seen these documents as part of the preparing for the inquiry and discussing with solicitors post fire. I don't recall seeing it at the time.
Right.
I'm not sure when I first saw it, perhaps around the witness statement time.
If you hadn't seen it at the time, how would you know what was being asked of you by Dr. Barker?
I was asked to do a existing fire safety strategy on an existing high-rise residential building with some documentation. Claire sat adjacent to me, so we will have had discussions around what was expected at the time. It's so long ago I can't recall
Right.
content of. I can guess at it, but I don't recall specific conversations
If
at
you
that particular time. But certainly we will have discussed what was required.
Right. If you hadn't seen it at the time, can you help me? How would you have known what the scope of the work was for the report that you were to produce?
Again, I'm assuming here that it was laid out from Claire and in the documents, which were to start to inform the process of preparing the document, the strategy itself.
Did you ask Dr. Barker to give you the fee proposal, which contained the scope of work, so that you could see in black and white what it was?
I don't recall. I genuinely don't.
How would you normally be told, or at the time, how would you normally have been told the scope of work for a report that you'd been instructed to prepare?
Typically, we would sit down and go through the project, essentially, of what was being done. So that's gathering all the information and looking at how we're going to actually set out the works and what we needed to do that. The fee proposal, in some instances, yes, that provides a baseline, but obviously you build on that kind of understanding from looking at the project documentation as well.
Now, you say typically we would sit down and go through the project, essentially, of what was being done. Was that done on this occasion with Dr. Barker?
I would assume so, considering the lack of emails, etc., that there is, and the fact that Claire sat adjacent to me. So, but I genuinely don't recall the contents of the conversations. I know that we will have had them. Yes. We worked quite closely together on several projects, so that's
right.
Was our usual.
So again, doing the best you can with your recollection, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you recall anything of her explaining the scope of the project to you?
Yes, I know we had conversations about it. I just don't recall the specific content of them. I know we discussed various matters, but I couldn't recall very specifics. It's too long ago.
But at any rate, you don't recall being shown the fee proposal itself?
No, I don't.
Right. Now, staying with paragraph 3.4 of your statement, you go on to say, I was not involved in deciding on this scope, but it is a basic standard agenda to include in a fire strategy report for an existing building. Each item would be broken into a number of sub-issues depending on the nature of the building which was being reported on. What would the specific sub-issues be for a residential high-rise building?
So it would be broken down essentially into the 5 key elements of fire safety regulation. So, for example, we would look at travel distances, compartmentation, firefighting facilities, and that would include firefighting stairs, dry risers, lifts, etc. And then within the compartmentation side of things, we'd look at things like cavity barriers and requirements for various separations in the building, lobbies, etc.
Right. If you go to page 2 of the fee proposal, please, which is back on page 2 at TMO 1003371. Can you see the scope of the work for the project would include? You see that? You see that there?
Yes.
Site visit and then the compilation of a fire safety strategy report. You see that? And then a few paragraphs down, in fact, the last but one paragraph before fire engineering team, it says, in developing the report, we would use our expert knowledge of fire safety design codes. The report for the building will consider the following items: means of escape, fire safety systems, any smoke ventilation provided, and access and facilities for the fire service. You see that?
Yes.
So would those be included in your basic sub-issues?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you, when you did your work, check that you had covered all of those?
In as far as it was able to do so with the information we had at the time, the document that we produced was only a draft, so there will have been extra things to put in, but at the time, yes, I think they were generally covered.
Okay. So when in your statement you refer to it is a basic standard agenda to include in a fire strategy report for an existing building, are you referring to those 4 bullet points as the basic standard agenda?
Yes, broadly.
Yes, I see. So do you remember, content to proceed to draft the fire safety strategy without seeing the fee proposal because you were confident that the basic standard agenda had been set out in it and that's what you would follow?
I would presume so. Yeah.
But you can't recall?
I can't recall directly, but
Right.
yes, it
Fair
makes
enough.
perfect sense.
Now, I know you didn't draft the proposal, and you may or may not have seen it at the time of your work. You can't remember, so I bear that in mind. But I still want to ask you 1 or 2 questions about it. Now, first, can I ask you to look at the proposed scope of work on page 2 where we are, where it says under the heading, the aim of the work. Do you see? It says the aim of the work would be the production of a retrospective fire safety strategy report for the existing building. This report will serve to inform the fire safety risk assessment and fire risk management plan for the building. The design of the building will be assessed against relevant design codes relating to the statutory requirements of on the design of the building under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, and also under Section 20 of the London Building Acts Amendment Act 1939, if the building falls within the size criteria specified by that legislation. Now, I've shown you all of that because I have a number of questions about it. But the first question is, can you explain to us what you meant, or what would have been meant, by a retrospective fire safety strategy report?
So retrospective being that it is based on an existing building. So we are looking at the fire safety design for a building that is already there.
I see. And when it says the report will serve to inform the fire safety risk assessment and fire risk management plan, did you have in mind that this document that you would produce would then be given by the building owner to its own fire risk assessor in order to take forward what had to be done to comply with the RRO?
Not entirely, no.
So can you explain, and again, I know you didn't draft it, but can you explain what you would have understood had you looked at this document at the time, if you did, by the words serve to inform the fire safety risk assessment and fire risk management plan for the building?
When a fire strategy is done for a new build, then the purpose of the strategy really is to set out the fire safety design and all the component parts of that building as a new structure. And because at the end of that construction process, a fire safety risk assessment would be required, it would then follow that. It would inform a fire safety risk assessment for a new build. However, with a existing building where there will already be a fire risk assessment, it's kind of backwards, if you will, it's retrospective, then I think the fire safety risk assessment also informs the fire safety retrospective strategy. So one serves to support the other, really. They should really be saying the same things.
Right. But would it be right then that you're looking, in doing your report, to assist the building owner in its management plan, as well as looking at any design questions?
I think with an existing strategy, the focus is more on the design. So in the context of the Grenfell strategy, it was really an informative piece of work to look at the fire safety design of the building for the design team, rather than a holistic fire safety audit, if you will, which would involve much more than just compliance with the building regulations.
Right. Well, let's just be a bit more focused in my question. When you see the sentence, which I've just read to you, the first sentence here, which refers to the fire risk management plan, whose fire risk management plan was that?
It will have been for the end users, so the council. KCTMO would be the fire risk.
Right. And therefore, can we take it that your work was to inform the KCTMO about its fire risk management plan?
I would disagree with that.
Well, I just wonder why you disagree with that, given that we can see that clearly stated in the sentence.
I can see that. That wasn't my understanding of the work that I was carrying out. I mean, with all of these kind of documents, there is certainly an amount of detail which is in these documents which can advise building owners and risk assessors as to what is there in the building, and you use those documents in a kind of a joined-up way. So, as I said before, one would inform the other. It does. I suppose reading the sentence, you inform the plan, but to a limited degree, I would say.
Right. Well,
they need to take those fire risks from the fire risk assessment, along with the strategy, to come up with their fire safety management plan for the building. So it's several documents would feed into that, really.
would I be right in thinking that approved document B is also it actually sets out regulatory guidance about building management and not only about design?
It does, but in a very limited way. It's so that the building can be managed rather than, whereas a fire risk assessment will go more into detail on the management side of the building, because it's a building in use at the time rather than a design guidance document, essentially.
Right. Going back to the sentence I've just read to you, does it come as a surprise to you? Because I know you say you can't remember reading this document. Does it come as a surprise to you? Well, let me just ask the question. Does it come as a surprise to you that the report was going to serve to inform the fire risk management plan for the building?
It's not so much as a surprise. It's the paragraph seems quite generic, to be honest. So the interlinked nature of all these documents, yes, it would inform, but it's not something that would go into in great detail.
Can I ask you please to turn to CLG 0000173 at page 12. This is part of approved document B, you see, under definitions, and then on page 12 on the left-hand column at 0.13. Do you see, Ms. Cooney?
Yes.
There's a title that says Management of Premises. I'm not going to read it all out to you, but it says in the first part of it, this approved document has been written on the assumption that the building concerned will be properly managed. Building regulations do not impose any requirements on the management of a building. However, in developing an appropriate fire safety design for a building, it may be necessary to consider the way in which it will be managed. A design which relies on an unrealistic or unsustainable management regime cannot be considered to have met the requirements of the building regulations. And then you can read the last paragraph as well, which is about once the building is in use, the management regime should be maintained, etc. Were you familiar at the time with the principle enshrined in that paragraph?
Yes, yes.
So if that's the case, why would it come as a surprise to you that the report that you were to draft would inform the fire risk management plan for the building?
I suppose it's a misunderstanding on my part of the word inform. I mean, we designed the building so that it can be managed, but we wouldn't go into the same kind of level of detail for that as you would in a fire risk assessment. I think that's the point I was trying to make.
I see. When you did your report, did you, just to get this clear, did you expect that your work would inform the fire risk management of the plan for the building?
Insofar as it is relevant to the fire safety design, yes. I suppose it does, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who did you expect would actually carry out the risk assessment?
At that time, I had the fire. Well, I asked for the fire safety, the fire risk assessment. So it was an ongoing assessor.
And who did you expect would create or draft the fire risk management plan for the building?
That's typically, an end user, a responsible person's role.
So in this case, it would be the. In this case, it would have been yes. Did you expect Studio E, who are after all giving you instructions, to pass on your report or draft report? We'll come to that later. To the end user, as you described them.
Yes.
Yes. So did you understand that your report was intended to assist the person responsible under the RRO to discharge their duties under it?
I would have expected it to go back to the client, yes, so that they could use it.
And also compliance with Section 20 of the London Building Acts, Amendment Act 1939.
As a relevant building, yes.
Yes. Now, if you go back, please, to the fee proposal, we can just do that. Which you'll find at TMO 0037721. TMO 10. Thank you. It's there. If we look, please, at page 2, we can see immediately below the opening part of the fee proposal that it says the scope of the work for the project would therefore include, and we looked at this a moment ago, site visit and the compilation of the report. We'll come back to the site visit question in a moment, but can we agree at least by reference to this document, Ms. Cooney, that a site visit of up to half a day was envisaged and included as part of the fee proposal.
Yes.
Yes. And we can then see some caveats, I think, underneath that. Do you see what it says? It says, it's assumed that a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment exists for the buildings in their current condition, and that any relevant findings of that risk assessment will be made available to Exova Warrington Fire. You see that?
Yes.
And the fee proposal then goes on to say below that the scope of the works is based on, and you can see, the assumption that a detailed appraisal is not required of the structural fire protection to the load-bearing elements of the structure or of the fire compartmentation within the building. However, if it should transpire during the site survey that such an appraisal is necessary, then the scope of works can be extended to cover this, subject to a separate fee agreement. So you saw that. So first of all, was it your understanding when you did your report that a detailed appraisal wasn't required of the structural fire protection to the load-bearing elements of the structure or the fire compartmentation within the building?
That's right, not for this particular piece of work.
Right. Who told you, if, and I know you can't recall seeing this fee proposal at the time, but if you didn't, where did that understanding come from? Or is that a standard basic element that you would essentially exclude a detailed appraisal of those matters?
It would be something which would be written in rather than written out. So the piece of work that I was given was essentially a desktop appraisal, desktop study, on the information that was given to us. So the paragraph you're referring to there would relate to a much more detailed and maybe invasive kind of survey of the building.
Yes. And it goes on indeed to say, if it should transpire during the site survey that such an appraisal is necessary, then the scope of the works can be extended. Can we take it that during the site survey, an appraisal did not present itself as necessary?
So James liaised with, I remember James liaising with me from site, where he outlined various items within the building. So.
Right. We'll come back to that shortly. Before I move down, can I just ask you to look within the same part of the proposal where it says, just above the 4 bullet points, in developing the report, we would use our expert knowledge of fire safety design codes. Which fire safety design codes would that have been referring to, do you know?
So as a benchmark, it would have been approved document B.
Approved document B. Anything else?
Also, Section 20 would come into it as a relevant building.
Yes.
Maybe the fire risk assessment guide for residential buildings as well, but as kind of the keystone, it would be approved document B.
Now, if you go down the page, you'll see a heading, Fire Engineering Team. You see that? And the second paragraph, it says, the fire safety team would be based in our London office. James Lee, consultant, and there's an email address and a telephone number for him, would lead the project with assistance from others within the company as necessary. CVs of the fire safety team can be provided upon request. So was it originally envisaged that staff in Exova's London office would do the work on this fire safety strategy?
That was my understanding, yes.
Right. Did it surprise you that you were being given the job of writing this report for a London building, given that you were based in Warrington at the time and not London?
No,
Right.
no, it didn't surprise me.
Did it surprise you that you would be writing it, but James Lee would be leading the project from London?
No.
Right.
No.
Now, he was a consultant at the time. I take it that was a more senior position to the one you occupied at the time.
No, the consultant is a grade below.
Oh, I see. You did say earlier. Yeah, so he was junior to you, was he?
Yes.
I see.
Time, yeah.
He was junior to you. And was Terry Ashton senior or junior to him? Do you remember? He was an associate.
Very much senior.
Very much senior. Okay.
Mr. Millett, I'm wondering if we're getting to a convenient point.
We are approaching a convenient point, and I was hoping to get to that point at 11:45.
All right.
But if I haven't, then I haven't. But let me. I think I can, if that's convenient to you, Mr. Chairman, and to the
carry
witness. Right. Let's look at the bottom of page 2. Fee proposal: fixed lump sum fee exclusive of VAT, but inclusive of expenses for each stage of the fire safety work is £2,865. See that?
Yes.
And that's subject to the detailed standard terms and conditions in Appendix A. Now, you can see that there. At 3.5, para 3.5 of your statement, if we can please go back to it, you can see that you say on page 2, para 3.5, I understood that it was proposed that Grenfell Tower would be altered and refurbished, and that the purpose of the existing FSR was to review the existing design and provide a baseline as to the compliance of the fire provisions with the current building regulations and guidance. When you say provide a baseline, what do you mean by a baseline? A baseline for what?
For the fire safety requirements. So to ensure that what was actually there in the building at the time was within the realms of what is acceptable for fire safety. As an informative piece of work, really.
You say I understood that it was proposed that Grenfell Tower would be altered and refurbished, and then the purpose was this baseline. Who told you that?
I remember being aware that the building was to be refurbished. However, they wanted an existing fire strategy for the design of the building as it stood. Not taking into account any of the proposed works.
One takes away from that paragraph the suggestion that there was going to be an alteration and a refurbishment to the tower for which the existing FSR was to be a baseline. Let me try the question in a different way. What was the intended relationship that you, as you saw it, between the fire strategy report that you were going to do and the proposed refurbishment works?
As I've said, as an informative piece of work that shows that if you know the design of the building at that time would meet with the requirements of the building regulations going forward. So, for example, if it didn't have any smoke shaft at all, that would be something of a showstopper. It would be a major redesign, etc. So it was looking at what was actually there and whether that was feasible for the refurbishment without actually going into what those elements were going to be.
Yes.
What they were at the time.
Yes, I see. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, that is a convenient moment
It is.
for you.
Good, yes.
And it's convenient all round.
Well, Ms. Cooney, you might like to have a break.
Thank you.
And we'll stop now then, and we'll come back at 12 o'clock.
Thank you very much.
While you're out of the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it. All right? Go to the usher, please. 12 o'clock, please. Okay. Yes, would you ask Mr. Cooney to come back in, please? All right, ready to carry on?
I am, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett?
Ms. Cooney, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cooney, prior to before looking at the draft fire safety strategy that you produced, I want to ask you some questions, if I may, please, about what information you had available to you when you were drafting it. First of all, site visit. Did you ever visit the site yourself?
I didn't know.
You didn't. Why is that?
It was my understanding that my colleague would be doing the site survey and relay information back in that manner.
You say it was your understanding that your colleague would be doing the site survey. Do we take it from that you learnt that he was going to do it or she was going to do it before they went?
I would presume so, yes. I can't recall exactly what the timeline was, but yes.
Who did the site survey?
James Lee.
So did you have a discussion with him about your proposed work before he did the site survey?
I do recall speaking with James about checking the ventilation. From that, I would assume that it was prior to him going.
Right, okay, we'll come to that in just a moment. Is the reason why he did the site survey and you didn't because you were based in the Warrington office and he was based in the London office?
Yes.
Right. Was it usual for you, at the time, do you remember, to prepare a draft fire safety strategy for a building without having visited it?
Both, yes and no. It depended on the building. So if it was a particular thing we had to see, then we would go to site. But many fire safety strategies are prepared from drawings.
Right.
So
Would it, in this case, have been useful, do you think, to have attended the site yourself?
it would have been, yes.
Now, let's just have a look back at the fee proposal, please. TMO 100377721, page 2. We looked at this earlier under the first bullet point on page 2, under proposed scope of work, site visit. And it says, a site visit expected to take no longer than half a day to survey the building's architecture and fire safety systems. You see that?
Yes.
Now, from what we've seen, Mr. Lee undertook a site visit on the 29th of May 2012. Do you recall that?
I don't, no.
He says it in his statement, and I don't think we need to call that up, but just for the transcript, it's EXO0000174, page 3 at paragraph 3.6. Now, do you know whether he ever took any other site visits other than the one he did on the 29th of May 2012?
I think I recall I did, yes.
Right.
Because I remember speaking to him about it. So
Right.
specifically in relation to the shaft dimensions.
Okay, now, just to get the dates right, he says he did his site visit on the 29th of May. The site visit took place, that site visit at least, took place before the fee proposal dated the 11th of June. But you're saying you think he did another one, a later one, after the 11th of June?
I think so. I can't be absolute guarantee it because it's so long ago. I don't remember the timeline, but I was under the impression that he had. Yes.
Right, but the site visit specified in the proposal is only for one, a site visit expected to take no longer than half a day. Are you saying that there was another site visit, even though the fee proposal specified the single visit?
There may well have been. That's not terribly unusual.
Right. Do you know why the quotation only quoted for one site visit, if one had already been done?
I don't know.
Right. Now, you say you spoke to him. When you spoke to him, roughly When was that?
Well, it will have been after I was asked to take the piece of work on. So I would assume it was between Dr. Barker giving me the piece of work and producing the draft document. So within that 2 or 3 weeks.
You see, we've been told that Mr. Lee, James Lee, left Exova on the 30th of July 2012.
Okay.
So if he left Exova on the 30th of July 2012, do you know why he was speaking to you from site, as you say, about this work after you were tasked with the preparation of the report?
That's how my memory remembers it. Like I say, the actual timeline, I don't recall precisely. It's in and around that time, so I suppose that's a question for Mr. Lee. But I do recall speaking to him.
Now, you say in paragraph 3.7 of your statement, if you can go back to that, EXO 00001590, page 3, you said at paragraph 3.7, in the last sentence there, I also discussed the layout with Mr. Lee, who had been on site, in order to understand the layout. Earlier this morning, you said, this is page 61 at line 18, you don't need to go back to it, that he liaised with you from site. Do you remember whether he liaised with you from site or after he'd been to site?
I don't know whether he was actually in the building at the time or whether he was in the vicinity or in the office, I suppose. I was on the phone, so I couldn't accurately say where he was. But what I recall is the conversation about the building and specifically the ventilation.
Right. Do you recall even roughly how soon after you were asked by Ms. Barker to do this report you had the conversation with Mr. Lee?
I don't recall it to that kind of level. Possibly in the first week afterwards.
Right. But just sticking with paragraph 3.7, you say you discussed the layout with Mr. Lee, who'd been on site, in order to understand the layout.
Yes.
It's logical, isn't it, that must have been before he left Exova?
Absolutely, yes.
Right.
Yes.
And if that's right, then your recollection about when you were first asked to prepare this report must be wrong, because he left in July. At the end of July.
I would have to check the dates when he left and the dates if there's any other correspondence which predates what I've seen. That is my understanding of the timeline. But it is some time ago, so memory can jump around a little bit.
All right. Your recollection in your statement at paragraph 3.7 is that you discussed the layout with Mr. Lee in order to understand the layout. Was your discussion with Mr. Lee limited to the layout?
No.
What else
No.
did you discuss?
I do recall speaking to him about the ventilation, as I've said, and just the general elements of the building. So I think we spoke about how the stair enclosure kind of came through the building and down the building to the final exit door, the last door out the building. I don't remember specifics other than those kind of things. Really.
Right. When you had the conversation with Mr. Lee about the enclosures and the final exit door, the matters you've just referred to, was he reporting to you about what he'd found on site, or were you asking him questions arising out of concerns you'd had from looking at the documents with which you'd been provided?
I remember being quite perplexed by the layout of the lower floors, because it didn't seem to flow on the drawings that I'd received, which were quite grainy. So I think I asked him if he would look at certain elements for me and report anything back on those.
Well, we'll come back to Mr. Lee in a moment. Can I ask you to go back, please, to paragraph 3.6, because I think I'd like to take Mr. Lee in a slightly more ordered way. 3.6 in your statement, page 3, which we can see there, you say, in producing the existing FSR, you say, I was initially provided with a limited amount of information. And then you go on to say that you recall looking at the original plans for Grenfell Tower on microfiche.
Yes.
And then you say, you assume they would have come from the architect. This is typical, you say, of the amount of information I would have expected to receive to carry out a fire strategy report on an existing building. So just to be clear, was the information that you were provided with just the microfiches of the original plans for Grenfell Tower?
Originally, yes. Yes.
How did you get those? Do you remember?
I requested them from Studio E.
Okay. Because you say, I assume, but you can't remember that they would have come from. Is that because you asked for them specifically?
I did ask for, we had no working drawings of the existing tower to actually consider, and they were obviously the benchmark, well, the basics of what you would expect.
Right.
So I requested them, yes.
Did you ask for anything else from Studio E other than the microfiches?
I asked for the. I asked several questions as I now remember from looking at documents, and the fire risk assessment for the building.
Right. You say that you were initially provided with a limited amount of information. I'm stressing those words.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain why you say the initial information provided to you was limited to that material?
Yes, the drawings which we received, which had been taken from microfiche archives of the tower when it was first designed, came through on A4 layout, and the actual building lines were quite fuzzy, for want of a better term. They were quite blurred over time, and obviously the process of getting them onto a paper format rather than on a microfiche. That's what I recall looking at initially.
Right. I mean, you say the information was limited,
Mm-hmm.
and all you got was the microfiche, and you added to that and just now.
Mm-hmm.
Why was the information that you got limited as opposed to all of the information that you would ask for and expect to get in order to be able to produce a report like this?
Just the quality of the drawings was very poor. So actually trying to determine the lines that surrounded the lobby, the firefighting stairs, the flats layouts, etc., were quite difficult to determine. And I remember taking quite some time to assess the layout from the drawings themselves.
Right. So if the quality of the drawings on the microfiche were so poor, as you say they were, why not get on the train and go down to Grenfell and look at it for yourself?
I could have done that, I suppose. I think having sat and studied and looked at them, the tower was, each floor was a replica of the one below it. So as long as I was pedantic about looking at those lines, I could see that was the structure of the building at the time.
You've answered my questions on paragraph 3.6 by referring to the quality of the outline of the drawings on the microfiche, which I understand. But the impression one gets from 3.6 is that you were initially provided with a limited amount of information, but that amount of information would be typical that you would expect to receive to carry out a fire strategy report on an existing building. So just so I understand your evidence, are you saying that the information about Grenfell Tower comprised in the plans on microfiche is all you would ordinarily get or expect to get in order to be able to carry out a fire strategy report such as this?
We would typically expect to see drawings for a building. It just was that the quality of these drawings weren't the best. So typically for an existing building, we would ask the responsible people, the people from the health and safety file, etc., for drawings, layouts of the drawing. Hopefully, if they have a fire strategy drawing, we'd ask for one of those, which would indicate various fire safety related matters. They really vary depending on the age of the building and how it's been recorded over time. But to have archived documents isn't unusual. I think the limited amount of information was due to the fact that they were quite small replicas of what was on the microfiche. So whilst you could kind of look at them and interpret them, it wasn't without having to go through a process to be able to understand the layout, if that makes sense.
Well, leaving aside the question of the quality of the drawings on the microfiche, would you normally carry out a fire safety strategy report on an existing building on such limited information as you've described here?
That's where we would start off, I think. Yeah, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you say in the last sentence, it's typical of the amount of information I would have expected to receive to carry out a fire strategy report. It rather suggests that that is all you would need in order to carry out a fire strategy report. Is that right?
I think it could be read that way. I don't think that's the intent of it. I think it's certainly part of the basic information that you would expect to receive.
What else would you expect to receive?
We would ask for as much information as we possibly could get, but certainly the fire risk assessment and any other pertinent information that was in the files that they had, we would go through.
Going back to your discussion with Mr. Lee that you recall, did Mr. Lee give you any information relating to the fire safety systems present in the building?
Beyond the ventilation, I can't recall specifics on the. I think there was some information about some detection.
I see.
But,
would you normally ask your client or your instructing person to provide you with up-to-date drawings of all active and passive fire safety systems within the building?
Not necessarily. If the basic infrastructure is there and the ongoing use of the building has maintained those, then we wouldn't necessarily we wouldn't interrogate that to the same level as a fire risk assessment would, with it being just a bit focused on the design criteria. So.
I'm not sure I understand why that is so. Surely you would want to see all accurate, detailed drawings which demonstrated the up-to-date position of all active and passive fire prevention systems or mitigation measures in the building in order to do your report, no?
You would, if they were available, yes. But at the time we were asked to carry out the work, that package of information was all we received, all we had. And we did, I do recall asking for information from Studio E, and that's where the fire risk assessment came from. But we could only work with the information that we had at that time. Otherwise, it would have, I suppose, pushed a deadline further back. And as it was a draft report anyway, it was a first kind of pulling together of all the relevant information we had at that moment.
Right, you say in that last answer, which I think I need just to follow up on, you say, I recall asking for information from Studio E, and that's where the fire risk assessment came from. We'll come to the fire risk assessment later, but I want to get clear, when did you ask for information from Studio E over and above the request for the drawings, the microfiche?
I think I asked for it on an email. I think there's an email somewhere where I've asked.
Did you actually specifically ask Studio E for the up-to-date drawings of all active and passive fire prevention or mitigation systems in the building?
Not in those words, but yes, we asked for all the information that they had or could get on the existing building.
Right. You say at paragraph 3.7 of your statement that you had difficulties trying to work out the layout of the lower floors from the information I had, so I requested drawings and photographs of Grenfell Tower from Studio E to assist me in visualising the layout. Now, again, wouldn't it have been simpler to take yourself down to the site and look at it yourself, and take your own measurements and photographs?
It's certainly something I could have done. Yes.
Yeah, my question really is, why didn't you?
Because I was liaising with other members of staff who were more local than I was. I was asked to undertake a desktop-based study. So, yes, right. I could have gone if I felt like the information I was getting wasn't answering questions.
Right.
I guess.
I see. Did you feel in any way that you were constrained by the budget of just under £3,000?
Not particularly, no.
Right.
No.
Did Mr. Lee give you any notes that he had made about his site visit?
I don't recall receiving anything written.
Did you ask him for any?
I don't recall that I did, no.
Why is that?
I do recall discussing with him on the telephone the various things, so I will have made my own notes from that.
Right.
Up in Morrington to incorporate into the report.
Right. Are you saying that you made a note of your telephone discussion with Mr. Lee?
I would have done, probably, as is my general when I'm trying to gather information. It would have been on the back of a drawing or something like that.
Right. Do you keep a notebook for each project that you're asked to do?
I don't. I do now, but
Right.
at the time I didn't know.
Was that general practice within Exova for people in your position, instructed to do a report, not to make notes of important matters?
No, it was various. So I know that Dr. Barker was quite fastidious about notebooks, but other members of staff would be more reliant on their emails or other the memories, etc., rather than documenting every single matter. Yeah.
So just to be clear, you're saying to us, are you, that you took a note of what Mr. Lee said on the call, and you wrote that down on the plans or on the back of the plans?
It will have been that was my general where I kept all my information, and then obviously once that information has been kind of dealt with, if you say the report has been prepared, then I would have put it in a pile with the other stuff to be dealt with, kind of as a filing system, if you will.
Yeah, and you say as a filing system, if you will. Do you know where those plans or those notes went? I
genuinely do not know what happened post carrying out the report, where they would have been probably with a stack of completed paperwork, which I don't know what I will have done with those. If I'm perfectly honest, they probably would have been disposed of at some point.
Would it be normal at Exova to maintain a project file for a project such as this?
It's normal to have a digital file, so we didn't keep, well, I didn't, as I say, other members of staff work in different ways, as everybody does, but I didn't keep a paper project file. Was there a document management system or a quality control system which actually made the system uniform across the organisation? Yes.
For maintaining documents?
Yes, there's a digital based filing system, if you will, but the notes that I will have incorporated within the strategy are then in the strategy, so I wouldn't have kept the original handwritten notes from the telephone conversation.
Have you been asked to provide those notes or identify or assist in identifying those notes from the project file, digital system as you call it, in order to be able to assist the inquiry?
Yes, every last piece of information in the office and on the computer systems was trawled through.
Okay.
So.
Now, do you remember, casting your mind back to the conversation, whether Mr. Lee made any comment on whether during his survey or surveys, as it now turns out, he an appraisal of the structural fire protection to the load-bearing elements of the building or fire compartmentation within it was required?
Sorry, could you rephrase that?
Yeah. Did Mr. Lee make any comment to you about whether during his site survey he thought that an appraisal of the structure was required, either in relation to the load-bearing elements or in relation to the compartmentation?
I don't recall whether he did. I do know that we put that into the report for it to be checked.
Right. Did you see the photographs that he took?
I do recall some photographs, yes.
Right. Let's just have a look at one or two if we can. EXO, please. EXO 00001749. These are some photographs. There are 24 of them, I think. If you could just be shown those with a quick scan through, some of them at the beginning. Are those photographs that are familiar to you, do you think?
Yes.
And do you think those are the photographs? What use would those photographs have been to you? Just, and some of them may be more useful than others, when you received them.
So that I could get a physical look at the materials of the building and its general scale and layout.
Right.
Some are, like you say, more useful than others, but...
Now, did you have any discussion with Mr. Lee about whether he had been told about the TMO's intended budget for Exova's work on Grenfell Tower?
Not that, no.
No. Did Mr. Lee or anybody else give you a reason to think that the job was being done on an extremely tight budget?
No.
Going back to this question of the baseline for compliance that we looked at earlier, you remember where you said in your report that the fire safety strategy was to be a baseline. Did you think at the time that it was essential that your report should be entirely accurate? Because if it wasn't entirely accurate, then that might have a knock-on effect on the fire strategy that was to be done for the refurbishment.
I don't think I ever looked at it from that point of view. It would be as accurate as I was able to make it with the information we had at that time, and as a report on which other matters may well refer back to see what the existing condition was.
Now, is it right that you carried out substantially all the work on the existing fire safety strategy for the tower except the site visit?
Yes.
Right. So nobody else helped you with it?
Not that I recall, really.
Right.
No.
Now, can I ask you to look at an email, please? EXO 00001279. This is your email to Andrew Martin on the 17th of August 2012 at 12:09. Now, the time may become important later in your evidence. We'll come back to that this afternoon. But just to orientate you in your recollection in terms of the chronology, this is the 17th of August, so the day after your existing fire safety strategy report was signed off by Claire Barker.
Okay.
Yes?
Okay, yes.
Right. Was this a... Well, take a chance to look at it. It's an email that you are probably familiar with by now because it was referred to by various people during the opening. Mm-hmm. And it's got some fairly colourful language in it, so it might trigger a recollection.
It does, yes.
Yes. We'll come back to that part of it later. But was this at a time when you were about to go on holiday?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So was this basically a handover email to Andrew Martin?
I wouldn't be as complete as saying it was a handover. I was expecting Bruce to get back to me,
Right.
having issued the strategy, and it was really for him just to field any calls that may come in whilst both myself and Dr. Barker were on leave.
Okay.
And yeah, it's...
Okay. Can I just focus with you then on the sentence just below the middle of the paragraph, which says James has been to site? Yes? You see,
yes.
You say James has been to site and given some advice, but I don't know what he said, but it would appear not much. Now, just focusing on that, can you just explain why you're writing that? If you've had a conversation with Mr. Lee that you now recall about the detail of what's in the building, including the state of the exits, etc.
As far as I don't know what. So this email, to put into context, is in relation to an email I'd been sent by Terry, I think it was, who was asking my opinion on a proposal from the architects on one of the options for the layouts of the lower floors in the refurbishment package. So it's not related to the existing strategy at all. So they were looking at the layout of those new floors containing some residential accommodation. So I know that James had been to site. He's spoken to the client, but he didn't. Maybe because he'd left or was imminently leaving. But I don't know what he'd actually said to the architects, or indeed if he had any contact with the client.
I see. Do you know, or did you discover what James Lee had actually said during the conversation you record him having had with somebody before you submitted the draft report to Dr. Barker for her peer review the day before?
I don't know what James had discussed on site with others now.
Did you not think to ask him?
In the context of what we were looking at here, I think there are some layout drawings somewhere that he was looking at some compartment lines and requirements for fire resistance, and I think that's where it's come from, because it didn't really detail much more than that to me.
Right. When you wrote this in your email, what were you going on when you said that he'd given some advice? I don't know what he said, but it would appear not much. Were you looking at an email, or were you referring to something that somebody told you?
I think it was to do with the email of the proposed layout of the residential proposals at the lower floors.
But you say he's given some advice, but I don't know what he said. Who told you that he'd given some advice?
I don't remember the context of formulating that particular sentence.
Well, when you go on to say it would appear not much, what would that appear to you from?
Again, just not having the information in front of me to see what's happened on site.
Well, who are you in contact with at all about Grenfell Tower, other than a conversation with James Lee about or from site and Dr. Barker?
The only contact I recall having with outside of Exova was with Bruce at Studio E.
Right. I see.
I know there were some emails from KCTMO with the fire risk assessment, but I didn't actually speak to. It was just a received email.
Right. Did you know that at this point that James Lee's visit had only lasted 2 hours?
No, I didn't.
Right. Would you agree that 2 hours would be insufficient in order to make a meaningful appraisal of the building for the purposes of preparing a fire strategy for an existing building, such as Grenfell Tower, which is a pretty substantial tower block?
I think if you have assessed the layout of the building in terms of fire safety design of that type of a building, it is a short amount of time, but it's not an unmeaningful amount of time where you can determine the various components of the building fairly quickly.
Yeah. Now, according to the evidence that Mr. Lee's given, he left Exova, as I said before, on the 20th of July 2012, which is more than 2 weeks before you started work on the existing building fire safety strategy. And indeed, he left almost a month before you sent the email to Andrew Martin that we've got up here on the screen. What steps did you take to ensure that you had obtained all the relevant information from James Lee regarding his site visit before he left?
Just from the conversation that we had, really, there was no reason for James not to give me all the information. I didn't specifically ask the question, is that all the information? Because it's not the kind of question you would necessarily ask. You would have that discussion, and that would be, the assumption that your colleague has given you everything that you need to have.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to this email later on.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to your statement, if I can, please. You say, and this is page 8 of your statement, paragraph 6.4, you say, excuse me, halfway down the paragraph, I had reviewed the existing fire risk assessment prepared by CS Stokes Associates Limited, dated 29th December 2010, which had been sent to me by Janice Ray of KCTMO. You see that? Mm-hmm. And that had raised no concerns regarding compartmentation, so would it have informed my assumption. Mm-hmm. Just so you're clear about the context, you're talking about the level of compartmentation, which you said you expected to be high. Mm-hmm. Can we assume together that the risk assessment that you're referring to is the fire risk assessment by Carl Stokes, dated the 29th of December 2010?
Yes.
Yes.
It was. Yes.
Okay, we're going to come to that in just a moment. Can I show you 2 documents, or 1 document before we get there? First of all, TMO 10037740. This is an email, if we look at the top email, from Paul Dunkerton to you on the 13th of August 2012, copied to Janice Ray, and you can see just below it, as the second email on the page, Janice Ray had sent to Paul Dunkerton something called attached. You see that?
Yes.
And we'll come to the attached in a moment. And then Paul Dunkerton sends it on to you. Kate, please find attached information requested. You see that?
Yes.
And that was in response to something the same day. Can I ask you to look at the attachment? This is TMO 10037743. This is the fire risk assessment of the 29th of December 2010 done by Carl Stokes for Grenfell Tower. Mm-hmm. So that was what was attached to the email. Do you remember seeing this attachment?
I do, yes.
Yes. Did you take any steps to verify that the fire risk assessment was accurate? We can see that it's dated December 2010, and this is now almost 2 years later. Mm-hmm. So question again, did you take any steps to verify that the FRA, the fire risk assessment, was accurate?
No, as a professional document, I didn't feel the need to dissect it beyond what it is.
Okay. If you look at page 1, you can see that there are some areas not covered. Mm-hmm. You see that at the foot of the page? Yes?
Yes, yes.
And that includes the boxing club, the nursery, access to the upper ground floor and upper ground floor level offices. What steps did you take, if any, to request the fire risk assessments for those non-residential areas which were excluded from Mr. Stokes' report?
I didn't request anything beyond this, and I think that the principal reason for that is that those areas are, whilst relevant to the RRO, and will have their own fire risk assessments individually if they're tenanted out, for example. The layout of the building and the structure of the building didn't didn't bring any cause for concern. It's a very substantial in situ concrete reinforced frame. So I didn't ask for any further information on that.
Why is that?
Probably at the time because I didn't think it was necessary for the draft that was going out.
Why wouldn't it be necessary for the draft?
Principally because of the construction of the building. Looking at it in hindsight, yes, it would have been a good idea to ask for it. However, the information that would have come back from that, I can't see that it would have added a great deal extra information that I couldn't already have gathered from the layouts and the drawing layouts themselves.
But it would have told you, or they would have told you, that this was a building which had a single staircase but was shared by a wide range of different uses, so sports, leisure, childcare and residential, and also the electrical substation. So it would have given you that information in detail, wouldn't it?
They may well have given more detail, but I was already aware that it was a mixed use on the lower floors.
Right. Now, if you look at the very foot of the page, you see it says significant findings and action plan of this fire risk assessment are inserted next with this document continuing on page 2. Did you note that when you read this FRA after Mr. Dunkerton had sent it?
I did, yes.
Did you ask Mr. Dunkerton for the significant findings and action plan referred to on page 1 there?
I don't recall that I did, no.
Why is that?
Because the reason I was looking for the fire risk assessment wasn't necessarily to look at the specific discrete items. For example, many fire risk assessments might look at the more at the condition of things or the management of the building, combustibles in escape routes, etc., etc. Whereas I was looking at the design of the building principally for the draft.
But was it not an important outcome, or were these significant findings and action plan not an important outcome or outcomes for you to see so that you could be sure about your baseline?
Well, in any fire risk assessment, any suitable and sufficient one, any action plan, any findings on the action plan should also be inherent in the report. So anything in the action plan should be drawn from the content of the report itself. It's a I suppose a summary of findings, isn't it? So the information should already be in there in any event. So I suppose the answer to that is it should be in the report in any event, rather than as a separate something new in the conclusion or the action plan.
So do I take from that answer that you were proceeding on the assumption that the report reflected all the significant findings in the action plan, and you didn't trouble yourself, such that you didn't trouble yourself to read it?
I don't think it's a matter of I didn't trouble myself. I think if the information had been there, of course I would have looked at it, but it should be in the body of the report in any event.
Right. Would you normally use or read a fire risk assessment that referred, well signposted, to significant findings in an action plan without actually reading the significant findings and action plan?
It would have been informative to have them, absolutely. But based on the scope of the work that I was doing at the time, I must have felt that the report gave me sufficient information to be able to base the existing fire safety strategy on. With hindsight, yes, I probably would ask for it now. At the time, I must have been satisfied I had enough information to go on.
But, my question really is, how could you be satisfied that you had enough information to go on without double-checking the information you did have in the report against the significant findings and action plan which formed an integral part of that report?
Again, I would say that the information should be in the report. So just to look at the summary at the end isn't where my focus would have been on. It would have been on the actual, on the content of the descriptions and the detail which the risk assessor had put in the report itself.
And going back to the question I asked a minute ago, so I'm not quite sure I've got an answer, Ms. Cooney, would it be normal for you to use or read a fire risk assessment that signposted significant findings and an action plan without reading them?
Like I've said, in hindsight, yes, I would ask for it, but I suppose that's your answer, isn't it? I would ask for it now. At the time, I obviously didn't have it. Whether I did or didn't ask specifically for it, I honestly can't recall. No. But I would assume that I didn't.
No. My question is, would it have been normal at the time not to have read the significant findings and action plan?
No, I don't suppose it would have been normal, but that's the information we had.
Now, you sent an email to Bruce Soanes on the 9th of August 2012 asking him for further information, and we can see that at EXO 00001592, please. And I'd like you to go to page 3. We can see that at the top of page 1 is an email from you to Bruce Soanes on the 10th of August, where you thank him for the information. I'd like just to go to page 3, bottom of the chain on page 3. You start the chain on the 9th of August, you see, and you say to him, "Hello, Bruce," and then you ask him some questions. You say, "Is the single stair serving the residential levels pressurised, or is it only the lobbies to the flats which have ventilation provision? Is there a dry riser? Is there a firefighting lift? Do you know the construction of the riser doors, i.e. whether they provide 2 hours fire resistance?" Within an existing building, I appreciate some information does vaporise over time. Any information you can provide would be useful. First of all, can I just ask you, what is a riser door? Is that the door to the dry riser or wet riser?
Yes, so riser doors, service risers, any doors that give access into the protected shaft.
Right, I see. If you had done a half-day site visit, would you ordinarily have been able to establish the answers to those questions?
Nominally, yes. Yes.
You say nominally?
Nominally. So with a 40-year-old door or a 30-year-old door, we would be looking at it for its general construction and to see whether it looks and feels like a fire door, essentially. There's no, if you don't have the certification for it, we couldn't pinpoint that exactly what door it was. But yes, we would look at the doors as part of that walk-around site.
Right. Why hadn't you gleaned this information from James Lee when you spoke to him?
I don't recall whether we discussed the doors. I do know that we did put a requirement in the strategy to check the fire resistance of the cores and doors, the fire resistance of the building generally.
If you knew that in an existing building some information would vaporise, as you put it, over time, wasn't it all the more important for you to go down to site, look at the condition of the building and assess the active and passive fire safety measures in the building?
With James going to site, James is an experienced fire engineer. I don't think it makes it more important that I would go down. I would expect that information to come, for him to make those kind of assessments when he's walking around the building to see that they are fire doors and the fit, etc.
But he clearly hadn't, had he? Because otherwise you wouldn't be asking these questions.
we wouldn't know necessarily the fire resistance of a fire door. We can go off the width, you can go off the strips and seals of a door to kind of guide you towards what the door might be. But without any markings on the doors, you're not necessarily going to find out whether it's a 1 or a 90-minute door or whatever it needed to be.
Can we take it that at this time you had to ask Bruce Soanes these questions because Mr. Lee had not been able to give you the answers? Had not given you the answers?
Possibly, yes.
Do you remember what
that would be an assumption, yeah.
Right. Do you remember what had prompted you to ask these questions of Mr. Soanes?
I think I was looking for the component parts to see whether they had any information on them. So
I see. If we look at, please, at the response that comes from Mr. Soanes on the 10th of August, it's at the foot of page 1, 1051 to you, copied to Paul Dunkerton and indeed others. And he says, "Dear Kate, yesterday was the project meeting for Grenfell. I will answer your questions as best I can. Paul Dunkerton might be able to forward to the right person in the TMO if you need further clarification." And then he answers your questions, you see. And then over at the bottom, he goes on to the next page, and there's a plan on page 2. And underneath the plan, do you see, it says firefighting lift, no. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. And then he says fire rating, not sure, but the lifts were refurbished a few years ago. Paul, might you be able to clarify? And then he says IMG 5870, existing lift doors. You see that? Mm-hmm. Now, that told you that at least that the lifts were refurbished a few years ago. Did Mr. Dunkerton ever clarify the information about that with you?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Did you chase it up from him?
I don't believe I did, no.
Why is that?
Because I think in the risk assessment there was quite a number of references to a firefighting and evacuation lift, which, being the fire risk assessment and done by somebody who's competent in fire safety, you would take to be the case. And if they have been refurbished, again, we wouldn't assume that they've been done in anything but a competent manner, as you would do as a responsible person. So if the lifts were indeed refurbished, then it wouldn't cause any alarm bells to go off, particularly.
You see, we know that you emailed Paul Dunkerton on the 13th of August, 3 days later than this, in order to ask him for the FRA. We've seen that. My question is, why didn't you follow up the question about the lifts with him when asking him for that information?
I don't know. I don't know. Possibly because I was looking for answers from the assessment. I can't recall.
Did you ask Mr. Soanes or anybody else for any further information before starting work on your draft strategy?
I can't recall. I know I had several conversations with Bruce, but timeline I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Did you request any fire safety policies?
No, I don't think so.
Did you request any fire safety management policies or procedures?
No, I didn't.
Did you request any maintenance records, such as records for the AOV or the lifts?
I didn't, but I wouldn't normally ask for maintenance records for a fire safety strategy, looking at the design of the building principally.
But I don't understand. What if you're looking at the existing fire safety strategy for the building? Mm-hmm. Why don't you want to know whether the lifts are working or not?
We're looking at a building in terms of its component parts for fire safety, principally in the desktop study that I was requested to do. With that information and the fire risk assessment and management documents that the responsible people hold, that all those documents come together to form a suite of documents to which they can refer. It was it was never my understanding, and it was never the intention of the document to be a holistic fire safety audit of the building. That's something quite different, and certainly not something that was in the scope of works that was to my understanding when I started doing it.
If for example, if the AOV, the smoke vent system, was there, but very old and not working, is that not something that you would want to know when crafting your strategy?
With these items, the items that we didn't have enough information on, we do, I recall having read it fairly recently, the fire strategy does ask for items such as that to be checked and investigated, so that we would have the confidence to say that those items could be part of the building, I suppose. But
Indeed.
It was in the strategy that we needed to check these things.
Yeah. So my question really again, why didn't you ask for example, the maintenance records for the AOV?
Because we asked for it was my understanding at the time, having read some of the information which was sent through to us, that the shaft was to be upgraded or maintained, or some areas of the shaft were being refurbished. So I suppose in a way it would have negated any maintenance records for that, because it was going to be refurbished. But as it stood at the time, we asked for it to be checked.
You, at the time, as we've seen from the 17th of August email to which we will return, didn't know very much about the refurbishment strategy. So you weren't able to make a decision not to explore the maintenance records of, for example, the AOV, were you?
Well, I do know that some of that information did relate to the mechanical shaft. I think that's why in the strategy there's quite a lot of information on the shaft, and does mention the refurbishment to it.
Right. But that would all be in the future. You were asked to provide an existing fire safety strategy for the building, and my question really quite simply is, how could you produce a reliable safety strategy for the client so that the occupants of the building would be safe without, for example, knowing whether the AOV system worked properly?
Because, my answer to that really is because the document wasn't intended to look at the maintenance of the building. That was for the fire risk assessment, which is clear in the fire risk assessment that's the maintenance and management and operation of the building is an integral part of that process. That's what you do in a fire risk assessment. But a fire safety strategy looks at the design of the building and whether that building can then be managed successfully for that design, rather than looking at it from a point of view of the management procedures and the maintenance. It almost becomes a hybrid, if you will, with fire risk assessment, which is why I'm kind of differentiating between what we were doing for a strategy and what I would consider to be part of a full audit, which it was never intended to be. So that's why we wouldn't have asked for those matters.
The fire strategy assessment, the fire risk assessment that you had on the 13th of August was dated the 29th of December 2010. So it was nearly 2 years out of date by the time you got it.
Okay.
Well, we can see that, 20 months or so out of date. Would you not have wanted to have had updating maintenance information about, for example, the lifts or the AOV system, so that you knew the current state of those fire safety devices or measures from which you could build a reliable safety strategy?
Again, I would say that as long as we had the infrastructure, and that infrastructure was being maintained by the responsible people, which was one of the assumptions of the strategy, then we wouldn't delve into the service records, etc., of various individual components of the building.
Does that explain why you didn't ask for training materials?
Yes, it's the same principle.
Or the fire safety organisational structure for those responsible for the building?
That's a matter for the fire risk assessment.
Or a full list of active and passive fire protection measures and their status?
Again, that would be part of the fire safety strategy, and they're component parts of it. But it's the others. No, we wouldn't necessarily ask for those in that depth.
Mr. Chairman, just two more questions, if I may, before the break. Did you request information about the current evacuation policy at the time?
Was this post or after I'd received the fire risk assessment?
At the time you sent your draft report to Dr. Barker on the 15th of August for her to review.
So, yes, my understanding was that it was a remain in place strategy for the resi and will have been simultaneous for the rest of the building.
And did you understand what it relied on, the stay-put strategy?
Yes.
What was that?
A high degree of compartmentation and various fire safety measures in relation to the fire service facilities and ventilation of the lobby.
I see. Thank you. Ms. Cooney, Mr. Chairman, that is a convenient moment for a break. I've come to a new topic.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. Mrs. Cooney, we're going to have a break now, so you and others can get some lunch. We'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it when you're out of the room.
I will.
All right? Thank you. I'd like to go to the usher. Thank you. Good. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.